Before I tell you about the man who couldn't speak, let me tell you about the scream that shook an entire city. It happened on a Wednesday night in Gangnam, 15 floors up in a penthouse that smelled like blood and expensive cologne. A man who hadn't spoken a word in 15 years finally opened his mouth, and when that scream tore through the silence, 3 mafia bosses dropped their phones. A corrupt police chief choked on his whiskey, and somewhere in that chaos, a Nigerian woman smiled, because she was the one who taught him how to speak again. This is the story of Zara Osei and Lee Joon-Ho, a debt collector and a silent beast, a Nigerian woman and a Korean ghost. 2 people who should never have met. But fate had other plans. And trust me, you need to hear this from the beginning. But first, I see you watching. The one who's been here for 2 minutes and hasn't subscribed yet. I know who you are. This video is 1 hour long. You're going to invest all that time in this story, but you can't give me 1 second to hit that subscribe button? Come on. Don't be that person. Hit subscribe. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Lagos? Seoul? London? New York? I want to know who's riding this journey with me. Drop your city in the comments right now. I'll wait. Alright. Now let's go back. 6 weeks before that scream. Back to where it all started. Lagos. The city that never apologizes. Where hustle isn't a choice, it's oxygen. And in a cramped office above a fabric shop in Yaba, a woman named Zara Osei was hunting. She wasn't hunting animals. She was hunting thieves. Zara was a forensic accountant, the kind of person who could look at a spreadsheet and see a crime scene. Where others saw numbers, she saw lies. And she was very, very good at catching liars. Her father had been swallowed by debt. Loan sharks had circled him until there was nothing left but shame and an empty casket. So Zara made a promise. She would never let debt destroy her family again. She would be the hunter, not the hunted. But promises don't pay rent. And her mother's shop was drowning. The landlord was coming. The electricity company was threatening. And Zara's salary? It wasn't nearly enough. That's when Chief Benson walked into her office with a red folder. Chief Benson was the kind of man who wore gold watches and smiled with too many teeth. He owned the debt collection firm where Zara worked, and he had a reputation: get results or get out. He told her about an opportunity. A big one. Seoul, South Korea. A syndicate called the Jade Serpent owed $2 million to one of his international clients. The job was simple. Fly to Seoul, trace the money, recover the debt, keep 20%. $400,000. Enough to save her mother's shop. Enough to breathe. Enough to finally stop running. But Zara wasn't stupid. She asked the obvious question. Why her? Why send a Nigerian accountant to a Korean mafia syndicate? Benson told her she was the only one smart enough. The only one brave enough. The only one who could track money through ghost accounts and shell companies. He was lying. Zara could smell the lie, but she was desperate. And desperation makes you ignore red flags. Makes you sign contracts you shouldn't sign. Makes you board planes to cities you don't know. So she took the job. 8,000 kilometers. 13 hours in the air. The whole flight, Zara studied everything she could find about the Jade Serpent Syndicate. The Jade Serpent wasn't just a gang. It was a shadow government. They controlled real estate, construction, gambling, and half the politicians in Seoul. The police were in their pocket. Journalists who asked questions disappeared. And then she found something strange. Every article mentioned one name with fear. Lee Joon-Ho. They called him the silent accountant. The strategist. The brain behind the Jade Serpent's expansion. But here's what made her blood run cold. Nobody had heard him speak in 15 years. Not a word. Not a sound. Some said he'd taken a vow of silence. Others said his tongue had been cut out. Street rumors whispered that he'd been cursed by a shaman for betraying his family. The truth was worse than any of them imagined. Zara landed at Incheon Airport at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Seoul hit her like a different planet. Neon signs in Hangul. The smell of street food she couldn't name. Everyone moving with mechanical efficiency. Her hotel was in Gangnam, paid for by Benson's firm. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. At 3 a.m. she found it. Hidden in the fine print of her contract, a clause she'd missed. If she failed to recover the debt, SE would be liable. Her mother's shop would be seized as collateral. Benson had played her. This wasn't an opportunity. This was a trap. But by the time she realized it, she was already 8,000 kilometers from home. Already signed to a contract. Already walking into the lion's den. The Jade Serpent's address was in Cheongdam-dong, where old money lived in buildings with no names on the doors. Zara's contact was a woman named Madam Chun. When Zara stepped into that office on the 14th floor, she knew immediately. She was expected. Too expected. Like they'd been waiting for her specifically. Madam Chun was in her 50s, elegant like a knife. She smiled at Zara the way a cat smiles at a mouse. She offered tea. She asked about Zara's flight. She never once mentioned the debt. Instead, she talked about loyalty, about family, about how the Jade Serpent valued discretion. And then she said something that made Zara's stomach drop. "You'll be working directly with our accountant. He's very particular. But I'm sure you two will understand each other perfectly." That's when he walked in. Lee Joon-Ho. He was tall. Early 30s. The kind of handsome that made you nervous because you knew it was dangerous. But it wasn't his looks that made Zara's breath catch. It was his silence. He stood there, staring at her with the intensity of someone reading a book. No greeting. No introduction. Just silence. Madam Chun explained that Joon-Ho would review Zara's credentials. That he would determine if she was suitable. She left them alone in that office. For 30 seconds they just stared at each other. Zara's heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed run. But she'd come too far. Her mother's shop depended on this. So she spoke first. Introduced herself. Explained why she was there. Professional. Confident. Like this was normal. He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and typed. Then turned the screen to face her. The text read, "You're not here for the debt." Zara's blood turned cold. Before she could respond, he typed again. "You're here to die." And that's when Zara understood. She wasn't a debt collector. She was bait. Benson had sold her out to cover his own debts. The Jade Serpent had been told she was coming. Told she was a forensic accountant who knew too much about their operations. She was never meant to recover money. She was meant to be silenced. But here's what saved Zara in that moment. She didn't panic. She didn't beg. Instead, she did what she did best. She calculated. She pulled out her own phone and typed back. "If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. So what do you actually want?" For the first time, something flickered in his dead eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. He gestured to a chair. She sat. He sat across from her. And then, he started typing. Fast. Paragraph after paragraph. And Zara read the story of how a man becomes a ghost. 15 years ago, Lee Joon-Ho was the golden son. Ivy League educated. Brilliant. Set to inherit his family's legitimate construction empire. But his uncle, his father's brother, had other plans. Uncle Min-soo had been running the Jade Serpent in secret, using the construction company to launder money. When Joon-Ho discovered the truth, he went to his father. Tried to stop it. His father chose blood over honor. Chose his brother over his son. They didn't kill Joon-Ho. That would have been mercy. Instead, they destroyed him psychologically. Locked him in a room for 6 months. Made him watch videos of people he loved being hurt because of his betrayal. Made him believe that every word he spoke caused death. It was systematic. Pavlovian. Every time he spoke, someone screamed. Every time he cried out, someone died on the screen in front of him. Until his brain broke. Until speaking became physically impossible. Until silence was the only way to stop the pain. By the time they let him out, he couldn't speak. Wouldn't speak. The trauma had rewired his brain. And his family, his cursed, corrupt family, made him the Jade Serpent strategist. Kept him close. Kept him controlled. A prisoner with expensive clothes. Zara read every word. And then she asked the question, "Why are you telling me this?" His answer, "Because you're going to help me burn it all down. Or we both die trying." He had a plan. He'd been planning for 15 years. Collecting evidence. Documenting crimes. Building a case that could destroy the entire syndicate. His uncle, Madam Chun, the corrupt politicians, everyone. But he needed someone from outside. Someone who could move freely. Someone with financial expertise to trace the money where he couldn't. Someone expendable enough that no one would suspect. Zara should have said no. Should have run. Should have called the embassy and begged for protection. But here's the thing about people who've been hunted their whole lives. They know how to spot other prey. And Joon-Ho? He wasn't a predator. He was prey pretending to be a beast. She could work with that. She typed, "I want 40% when this is over. And protection for my mother. Those are my terms." He typed back, "Deal. Welcome to hell, partner." And just like that, in an office in Gangnam between a Nigerian woman who refused to drown and a Korean man who'd forgotten how to scream, a partnership was born. The most dangerous kind. The kind built on desperation and mutual destruction. For 3 weeks, Zara and Joon-Ho worked in secret. To everyone else, she was just the foreign accountant reviewing books. Madam Chun watched her, of course. Had her followed. Checked her hotel room. But Zara was Nigerian. She'd grown up in Lagos. She knew how to smile while planning 3 moves ahead. She and Joon-Ho communicated through encrypted messages, burner phones, dead drops in coffee shops. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand the full scope of the Jade Serpent's empire. They weren't just a Korean syndicate. They had operations in 12 countries, shell companies in Singapore, real estate in Dubai, politicians in 3 governments, and at the center, a digital vault containing 15 years of evidence, murders, bribes, human trafficking, everything. The vault was in the Jade Serpent's headquarters. Password protected. Only accessible from Joon-Ho's computer. But there was a problem. Joon-Ho was watched 24/7. He lived in a penthouse owned by the syndicate. His movements were tracked. His computer monitored. If he tried to access that vault outside of normal business hours, alarms would trigger. They needed a distraction. Something big enough to pull all eyes away from him. That's where Zara came in. The plan was insane. Zara would accuse Madam Chun publicly of embezzlement, create chaos, force an emergency audit. While everyone was scrambling, Joon-Ho would download the vault and send it to international authorities. It was a suicide mission. If it worked, they'd both need to disappear immediately. If it failed, they'd both die slowly. Zara called her mother that night. Didn't tell her anything. Just said, "I love you" 17 times. The next morning, Zara walked into the Jade Serpent's executive meeting and dropped a folder on the table. In front of Madam Chun, Uncle Min-soo, and 5 other Mafia bosses, she presented evidence of Madam Chun's private accounts. 2 million in skimmed funds. Hidden properties. Secret deals. The room exploded. Accusations flew. Madam Chun lunged at Zara. Actually lunged, had to be held back by bodyguards. Uncle Min-soo demanded an immediate full audit. Every computer. Every account. Right now. While 20 people scrambled through files and 3 bodyguards held Madam Chun back and Uncle Min-soo screamed threats. Joon-Ho accessed the vault. 15 years of evidence. Names. Dates. Videos. Bank accounts. Murder orders signed by politicians. Everything. The files started downloading. Progress bar crawling. 67%. 78%. 94%. But Madam Chun wasn't stupid. In the middle of the chaos, she looked up and realized, where was Joon-Ho? She understood instantly. The accusation was fake. This was a distraction. She ran. Bodyguards followed. Joon-Ho's hands were shaking. Almost there. 98%. Almost. The door burst open. Madam Chun stormed in, gun drawn. But it was too late. 100%. The files were gone. Sent to Interpol. The FBI. The Korean National Police Agency. Every investigative journalist in Asia. The Jade Serpent was finished. Madam Chun did what cornered animals do. She aimed her gun at Joon-Ho's head. But she didn't pull the trigger. Because she knew something nobody else knew. She looked at Joon-Ho and said, "You think you won? You think this is over? You're still my nephew. You're still my blood. And I will make you watch everyone you care about suffer before I let you go." And that's when Joon-Ho realized the final betrayal. Madam Chun wasn't his aunt by marriage. She was his father's sister. His blood aunt. The one who'd orchestrated his torture 15 years ago. The one who'd broken him. She'd been controlling him his entire life. and she just ordered a hit on Zara. Zara was 3 blocks away, walking to their extraction point, when she noticed the black cars following her. She ran. They chased her through Gangnam like a movie. Except this was real and the bullets were real and Zara's lungs were burning, and she didn't know if Joon-Ho was alive or dead, or if anyone was coming to help her. She ended up cornered in an alley behind a noribang. For men. For guns. No escape. This is where Zara Osei was supposed to die. But you know what Zara thought about in that moment? Not her mother. Not her life flashing before her eyes. She thought about her father. How he'd died quiet. How he'd let the sharks win. And she decided if she was going to die in Seoul, she was going to die loud. She grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung. She wasn't a fighter. Wasn't trained. But she was Nigerian, she was desperate, and she was done being prey. She took down 2 before they overwhelmed her. Felt her ribs crack. Tasted blood. Saw the gun rising toward her face. The gunshot came from behind them. Joon-Ho had stolen Madam Chun's car. Driven like a demon through Seoul traffic. Found Zara through the tracker in her phone. He stood there, gun still smoking. Eyes wild with something that looked almost like fear. The other 2 men turned their guns on him. Mexican standoff in a Seoul alley. And that's when something impossible happened. Joon-Ho opened his mouth. For 15 years he'd been silent. For 15 years trauma had locked his voice in a cage. For 15 years speaking had meant death in his broken brain. But Zara was bleeding on the ground. And something in him broke. Or maybe it healed. He screamed. Not words. Just sound. 15 years of rage and pain and grief compressed into one moment of pure, defiant noise. It was so unexpected that the men froze. Just for a second. That second was enough. Joon-Ho moved like violence choreographed. Zara fought like a wounded animal. Together they survived. When the police sirens finally wailed in the distance, real police, Interpol, alerted by the files, they were standing over 4 unconscious bodies, covered in blood, breathing hard. Zara looked at Joon-Ho. Joon-Ho looked at Zara. And then he whispered, voice raw, broken, beautiful. You're alive. First words in 15 years. She started laughing. Couldn't help it. Laughing and crying and bleeding. Yeah, she said. We both are. The next 72 hours were chaos. The Jade Serpent collapsed. 23 arrests. Politicians resigned. Uncle Min-soo was found trying to flee to Taiwan. Madam Chun escaped. Disappeared into the network she'd spent decades building. They'd find her eventually, but not today. Zara spent 3 days in a Seoul hospital. Broken ribs, concussion, 17 stitches. Her mother flew in, cried for 6 hours straight. Then started negotiating with Korean lawyers. Joon-Ho testified for 9 hours. His voice came and went, some days just whispers, some days nothing. Trauma doesn't heal in a week. But he was trying. The authorities offered him witness protection. A new identity. A chance to disappear. He declined. Because running meant Madam Chun won. And he was done letting her win. When Zara was released from the hospital, she found Joon-Ho waiting outside. They stood there, these 2 people who'd met as enemies and become something else entirely. Not quite friends. Not quite lovers. Something forged in blood and desperation. He handed her an envelope. Inside a bank statement. $800,000. Her 40%. Your mother's shop is safe, he whispered. She could go home now. Back to Lagos. Back to safety. But here's the thing about surviving something like this. You don't just walk away unchanged. What are you going to do now? Zara asked. Joon-Ho's answer came slowly, words still fighting their way out. There are 12 other syndicates. In 12 other cities. Someone needs to stop them. Someone. Zara said. Or us. And there it was. The question hanging between them. She could leave. Should leave. Take her money, heal her family, live safe. But Zara had learned something in Seoul. She was tired of being prey. Tired of running. Tired of letting sharks circle her family. She'd found something in that blood-soaked alley. Not love, not yet. But purpose. Partnership. Power. I'll need to go home first, she said. 6 months. Get my mother settled. Learn actual combat training because that alley situation was messy. Joon-Ho nodded. 6 months was fair. And then, he whispered. Then we hunt. Zara said. Together. They shook hands. A contract signed in understanding instead of desperation. 6 months passed, and let me tell you what those 6 months looked like. Because healing isn't a montage. It's messy and slow, and sometimes you take 3 steps back for every 1 step forward. Zara returned to Lagos on a Wednesday morning. Her mother was waiting at the airport, and when they saw each other, they both just stood there crying in the middle of Murtala Muhammad International Airport for 10 straight minutes. Other travelers walked around them. Some stared. Zara didn't care. Her mother kept saying, "You're home, you're alive," like a prayer. Like she'd convinced herself she'd never see her daughter again. And maybe she was right to think that. Because the Zara who left Lagos 6 weeks earlier? She died in that Seoul alley. The woman who came back was someone new. Harder. Sharper. But also somehow more whole. The first week back, Zara couldn't sleep. Every sound made her reach for weapons she didn't have. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. She'd wake up swinging at nothing, her mother holding her, whispering, "You're safe, you're home, you're safe." But was she? Madame Chun was still out there. The Jade Serpent had collapsed, but its roots ran deep. And Zara had made enemies who didn't forget. She used some of the money to hire private security for her mother's shop. 2 guys, former military, who stood outside and made sure nobody who looked wrong came anywhere near. Her mother protested. "This is too much, Zara. What kind of trouble were you in?" But Zara insisted. She couldn't tell her mother the truth. "How do you explain that you helped take down a Korean Mafia syndicate? That you watched a man learn to speak again after 15 years of silence? That you killed people in an alley to survive?" So she said, "I saw some things in Seoul, Mom. Bad things. I just need to know you're protected." And her mother, bless her, asked no more questions. The shop was saved. More than saved, thriving. Zara invested in new inventory, better displays, even hired 2 employees so her mother could actually rest for the first time in a decade. Watching her mother laugh with customers again, seeing her stress lines fade slightly, that made everything worth it. But Zara couldn't settle. She'd go to the market with her mother and find herself analyzing exit routes. She'd eat jollof rice and mentally calculate money laundering patterns. She'd hear someone speak Korean in a Lagos restaurant, and her whole body would tense, ready for a fight. She needed training. Real training. Because that alley in Seoul had taught her something crucial. Anger and desperation could get you through one fight, but skill kept you alive for the next one. So she found a gym in Victoria Island run by an Israeli woman named Ruth who'd served in the IDF, and didn't ask questions about why a forensic accountant suddenly wanted to learn Krav Maga. Ruth just looked at Zara's eyes. Whatever she saw there made her nod once and say, "We start tomorrow. 5 a.m. 5 a.m. became Zara's religion. 3 hours every morning. Learning how to break holds, disarm weapons, use everyday objects as defense tools. Her body transformed. Muscles appeared where there'd been soft curves. Her hands developed calluses. Her reflexes sharpened. Ruth taught her something important. Fighting isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and moving anyway. Fear keeps you alert. It keeps you alive. Zara thought about Joon-Ho a lot during those training sessions, wondered how he was doing, if his voice was getting stronger, if he thought about her. They'd agreed on minimal contact for safety reasons. No calls, no messages that could be traced. Just one encrypted email every 2 weeks with a single word. Breathing. Confirmation they were both still alive. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Zara would get that email. Just one word. Breathing. And she'd reply the same. Breathing. It was the loneliest form of connection she'd ever experienced. But it was enough. It had to be enough. She also started building her network. Lagos is a city of hustlers, and if you know where to look, you can find people who specialize in anything. Information brokers in Ikoyi, hackers in Yaba, ex-police officers who still had connections, journalists who'd investigated corruption and lived to tell about it. Zara met them in bars, in churches, in market stalls. She bought drinks, asked questions, listened more than she spoke. She learned who was trustworthy and who would sell you out for the right price. She built a mental database of allies, potential resources, people who might be useful when she went back to Seoul. Because she was going back. That was never a question. The question was whether she'd be ready. 3 months in, she started having the dreams. Not nightmares, dreams. of Seoul's neon lights, of Joon-Ho's almost smile when she said something that surprised him, of the way he'd typed on his phone with such precision, every word chosen carefully because words had been weapons that hurt him for so long. She dreamed of his scream in that alley, the raw, broken, beautiful sound of a man reclaiming his voice. She'd wake up with tears on her face and not know if she was crying from trauma or something else entirely. Her mother noticed, of course. Mothers always do. "You're going back," she said one evening, not a question. They were sitting on the balcony of the shop's upstairs apartment, watching Legos traffic swarm below like angry bees. Zara didn't deny it. "Yes. Is it a man? It's more complicated than that." Her mother was quiet for a long time. Then, "Your father ran from his problems until they swallowed him. You run toward yours like they're challenges to conquer. I don't know which is braver or more foolish. Maybe they're the same thing." "Mom, I'm not finished." Her mother's voice was firm. "You came back different. Harder, yes, but also more yourself. Like you found something in Korea that you've been looking for your whole life. So go back. Finish whatever you started. But promise me you'll come home again." Zara promised, even though she wasn't sure she could keep it. The training intensified. Ruth started bringing in her contacts, people who'd worked security, military intelligence. They taught Zara things that aren't in any official manual. How to spot a tail. How to plant evidence. How to extract information from hostile sources. How to disappear in a crowd. One of them, a South African woman named Thandi who'd done private security work across 3 continents, took Zara aside after a particularly brutal sparring session. "You're training for war," Thandi said. "I can see it. Whatever you're going back to, it's not finished." Zara wiped blood from her split lip. "No, it's not." "Then let me teach you the most important thing. How to win wars isn't about fighting. It's about information, intelligence, knowing your enemy better than they know themselves." She paused. "And knowing yourself well enough to recognize when you're becoming the monster you're hunting." That hit harder than any punch Zara had taken that day. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Joon-Ho was fighting his own battles. Different battles, but just as brutal. The first week after the Jade Serpent's collapse, he couldn't leave his apartment. Not because of physical injury. The wounds on his body healed relatively fast. But every time he tried to step outside, panic attacks would hit him so hard he'd end up on the floor, gasping, unable to breathe. For 15 years, the Jade Serpent had been his entire world. His prison, yes, but also his structure. His purpose. His identity. And now it was gone. He was free. And freedom was absolutely terrifying. The therapist the prosecutor's office assigned him was a woman named Dr. Park. She was in her 60s, had kind eyes and zero patience for bullshit. Their first session, she just sat there waiting for him to speak. Joon-Ho tried. Opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His voice had returned in that alley for one moment of pure survival instinct. But now, in a safe office with a kind woman waiting patiently, the words wouldn't come. Dr. Park waited 30 minutes. Then she said, "It's okay. We can sit in silence." "That's fine. But I need you to understand something. Your voice didn't leave because of magic or curses. It left because speaking became associated with unbearable pain. And getting it back? That's going to require you to face that pain. Every single day. Until your brain learns that speaking doesn't equal death anymore. Are you ready to do that?" Joon-Ho typed on his phone. "I don't know." "Good," Dr. Park said. "Honesty. That's where we start." It took 2 weeks before he could whisper a single word in her office. The word was Zara. Dr. Park asked him to tell her about Zara. So he did, typing at first, then forcing himself to whisper through the words, even though every syllable felt like swallowing glass. He told her about the Nigerian woman who'd walked into his office expecting to die, and instead pulled out her phone and negotiated. About how she'd looked at him, at his silence, his trauma, his broken pieces, and hadn't flinched. About how she'd stood in that alley with broken ribs and decided to die fighting rather than die begging. "You love her," Dr. Park said. Not a question. Joon-Ho's fingers froze on the keyboard. Did he? Was that what this was? He'd never loved anyone. Hadn't allowed himself to. Love was leverage, and in his world, leverage meant weakness, meant death. But Zara, She made him want to speak, want to try, want to believe that maybe he was more than the trauma that had defined him for 15 years. I don't know how to love people, he finally typed. Then learn, Dr. Park said simply. You learned how to survive. Learning how to live is just the next step. The therapy was brutal. They used exposure therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR for his PTSD. Some days were good. He could whisper full sentences, could go outside, could almost feel normal. Other days he'd regress completely, wouldn't speak for 48 hours straight, would wake up screaming from nightmares where his uncle was locking him in that room again. But slowly, painfully, progress happened. He started by just existing in public spaces. Coffee shops where he'd order by pointing. Libraries where he'd sit and breathe. Parks where he'd walk and remember what it felt like to be human instead of a weapon. The Korean media had a field day with the Jade Serpent's collapse. Joon-Ho became a reluctant celebrity, the silent witness who'd brought down one of Korea's most powerful crime families. Reporters camped outside his apartment. News stations wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the man who couldn't speak. His lawyer fielded everything. No interviews. No statements. Just testimony in court, which Joon-Ho delivered in written form and occasional whispered words that the judge had to strain to hear. Uncle Min-soo's trial was the hardest day of Joon-Ho's life. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at the man who'd destroyed him, having to speak, actually speak out loud, about what had been done to him. He managed 3 sentences before his voice gave out. He locked me in a room. He made me watch people die. He made me believe my words caused their deaths. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the judge looked shaken. Uncle Min-soo showed no remorse. Just stared at Joon-Ho with cold eyes and said, "You were always weak. That's why you broke so easily." Something in Joon-Ho shifted in that moment. He'd spent 15 years believing he was weak. That breaking made him less than human. That his silence was proof of his failure. But sitting in that courtroom, forcing words past trauma, telling his truth even though it hurt, that wasn't weakness. That was the bravest thing he'd ever done. He stood up, looked his uncle in the eyes and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't break. You did. And now everyone knows it." Uncle Min-soo was sentenced to 25 years. It should have felt like victory. It felt like closing a wound that would never fully heal but might, eventually, stop bleeding. After the trial, Joon-Ho started the company, the Silent Contract Consulting. The name was Zara's idea. She'd suggested it in one of their 2-word encrypted emails. "Contract," he'd replied. Perfect. Setting up a business gave him purpose. He rented a small office in Itaewon, hired a lawyer and an accountant, started building a legitimate operation. The plan was simple. Use his knowledge of criminal finance and Zara's forensic accounting skills to help people who'd been victimized by organized crime recover their money and get justice. But more than that, hunt the organizations that preyed on the vulnerable. Take them down the way they'd taken down the Jade Serpent. Legal, methodical, thorough. He spent 3 months setting everything up, preparing for Zara's return. 2 desks, 2 computers, a coffee maker because Zara had mentioned in an email that she'd become addicted to Korean coffee during her time in Seoul. Files on 12 different crime syndicates they could potentially target. Everything ready. Everything waiting. Except him. Was he ready? His voice was still unpredictable. Some days strong enough for short conversations. Other days completely gone. His trauma responses were better but not gone. Loud noises still made him flinch. Enclosed spaces still triggered panic attacks, and he still had nightmares where he was locked in that room, unable to scream. Dr. Park told him something important. "You're not trying to go back to who you were before the trauma. That person is gone. You're becoming someone new. Someone who carries the trauma but isn't defined by it. That's harder. That's braver. And that's what Zara will be coming back to. Not the man you were, but the man you're becoming." The 6-month mark approached. Joon-Ho cleaned the office for the 3rd time that week. Checked his phone constantly. Wondered if she'd actually come back. If maybe she'd realized that Seoul, that this whole plan was too dangerous, too crazy, too broken. And then, on a Tuesday morning at Incheon Airport, he saw her. Zara walked through arrivals looking like she'd gone to war and won. She'd always been beautiful, but now there was something else. A dangerous grace. a confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of. Her natural hair was braided close to her scalp. She wore practical clothes that could facilitate movement. Her eyes scanned the crowd with the awareness of someone who'd been hunted and learned to hunt back. She spotted him. Smiled. Not a big smile, just a small upturn of lips that said, "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Joon-Ho walked toward her. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice when it came was steady. "You came back. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would." A pause. "I'm glad you did." They stood there in the middle of Incheon Airport. Two people who'd survived the impossible. About to embark on something even crazier. "Ready to change the world?" Zara asked. "With you," Joon-Ho said. "Always." And that's how the real work began. When Zara's plane touched down in Seoul 6 months later, Joon-Ho was waiting at arrivals. He'd shaved. Looked healthier. Less like a ghost and more like a man. "Ready?" he asked, voice still quiet but steady. "Always," she said. They opened their office in Itaewon the next day. Walking into that space together felt surreal. Like a dream they'd both been having separately that was suddenly impossibly real. The office was small but functional. 2 desks facing each other. Windows overlooking a street full of international restaurants and shops where Korean mixed with English, Japanese, Chinese, and a dozen other languages. It felt appropriate. A liminal space where cultures collided, where people existed between identities. Just like them. Zara walked slowly around the space, taking it in. She stopped at the coffee maker and laughed. "You remembered. You mentioned it. 3 months ago. Email number 7. Joon-Ho's voice was quiet but present. "You said you'd become addicted to Korean coffee. You counted the emails?" "I counted everything. It was all I had." The weight of that statement hung in the air between them. 6 months of separation. 12 emails total. 24 words exchanged. Breathing. Breathing. Over and over. The loneliest lifeline either of them had ever held on to. Zara touched one of the desks. "So, we're really doing this. Unless you've changed your mind. Have you?" Joon-Ho met her eyes. "Every day. Multiple times a day. This is dangerous. Probably stupid. Definitely going to get us hurt or killed or both. And yet, I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. Or anyone else I'd rather do it with." Zara smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes. "Then let's get to work." Their first case came from an unexpected source. A text message to Joon-Ho's phone from a blocked number. Just an address in Hongdae and a time 6 p.m. They should have ignored it. Should have been more careful. But curiosity and recklessness are close cousins, and they'd both always lean toward the latter. They showed up early, scoped the location. A small Vietnamese restaurant tucked between a K-pop merch store and a coin karaoke place. Zara positioned herself near the back exit. Joon-Ho took a table with clear sightlines to both entrances. At exactly 6 p.m., a woman walked in. Vietnamese, mid-40s, expensive but understated clothes. Eyes that had seen too much. She scanned the restaurant, spotted Joon-Ho, walked directly to his table. "Lee Joon-Ho," she said in Korean. "The silent beast who learned to scream. I've been looking for you. Who are you?" "My name is Lin Nguyen. My daughter is 19 years old. 6 months ago, she came to Seoul to study at Yonsei University. 3 months ago, she disappeared." Lin's voice was steady but her hands were shaking. "The police say she probably ran away. Met a boy. Decided to drop out. They're not investigating. But I know my daughter. She wouldn't just disappear. And I think she was taken." Joon-Ho gestured to Zara, who moved from her position to join them at the table. "This is my partner Zara Osei. Tell us everything." What Lin told them over the next hour was a story they'd hear variations of many times in their career. A young woman from Southeast Asia coming to Seoul with dreams of education and a better life. Initial excitement, regular phone calls home. Then the calls becoming less frequent, more strained. Then stopping entirely. And when Lin flew to Seoul to investigate, she found her daughter's apartment empty, her things gone, and no one willing to say what had happened. But Lin had done her own investigating. She'd found other families with similar stories. Vietnamese, Thai, Filipina girls. All came to study or work. All disappeared. All dismissed by police as runaways or girls who'd gotten involved with the wrong crowds. There's a pattern, Lin said. I know there is. But I'm one woman in a foreign country and I don't know how to prove it. That's when I heard about you too. About the Jade Serpent. About what you did. She looked between them. Can you help me find my daughter? Zara and Joon-Ho exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of case they'd started this firm to take. It was also dangerous, probably involving human trafficking, which meant organized crime, which meant they'd be stepping on very dangerous toes very quickly. We need 3 days to investigate, Zara said. See if there's enough evidence to build a case. If we find something concrete, we'll take it on. But Ms. Nguyen, you need to understand that if your daughter was taken by traffickers, the chances of finding her alive are. I know the statistics, Lin interrupted. Her voice broke slightly. But she's my daughter. I have to try. Even if all I find is closure. They took the case. The investigation revealed exactly what they'd feared. A trafficking operation running between Vietnam and Seoul, targeting young women from middle-class families who came to Korea for school or work. The operation was sophisticated, fake study abroad programs, legitimate-looking recruitment agencies, even partnerships with actual Korean language schools that served as fronts. The girls would arrive, start their programs, and then systematically be isolated. Their documents would be lost. Their bank accounts would be frozen. They'd be offered temporary housing that turned into prisons. And then they'd disappear into an underground network that moved them between Korea, Japan, and China. The organization running it called themselves the Red Phoenix Society. They were smaller than the Jade Serpent had been, but no less vicious. And they were smart. They targeted girls whose families were far away, who'd be less likely to raise alarm bells, whose disappearances could be written off as runaways or girls who'd gotten involved with bad situations. Zara spent 2 weeks tracking the money. The Red Phoenix Society used a complex network of shell companies, cryptocurrency, and traditional cash businesses to move their profits. But everyone makes mistakes, and she found theirs. A pattern of payments to a specific karaoke bar in Gangnam that claimed to do legitimate business, but whose reported revenue didn't match its actual foot traffic. Joon-Ho used his old contacts, not the criminal ones but the people who'd been trapped in that world like he had been. Drivers, accountants, low-level workers who hated what they did but felt they had no choice. He approached them carefully, offering not threats but understanding. I know what it's like to be trapped. I know what it's like to do things you hate because you're afraid. But there's a way out. Help me and I'll help you. 2 of them talked. Gave him locations, names, schedules. Between Zara's financial trail and Joon-Ho's intelligence gathering, they built a map of the Red Phoenix Society's operations. And at the center of it, running a karaoke bar that served as a processing center for trafficking victims, was a man named Park Dong-min. Park was in his 50s, had connections to politicians and police, and had been running variations of this operation for 20 years. He was careful, patient, ruthless. He was also about to meet Zara Osei and Lee Joon-Ho. They couldn't go to the police. Park owned too many of them. They couldn't go public. He'd disappear at the first hint of exposure. They had to do this the old way. The dangerous way. The way that might get them both killed. Zara walked into Park's karaoke bar on a Thursday night dressed like she belonged there. Expensive dress, confident walk, the aura of someone with money and no questions. She dyed her hair, wore colored contacts, spoke with an American accent she'd practiced for a week. She was playing a role. An American Nigerian businesswoman looking to invest in Seoul's nightlife scene. She had fake credentials, a fake background, and enough actual business knowledge to make it convincing. Park met with her in a private room. He was charming, professional, offering drinks and talking about profit margins and market opportunities. He had no idea he was being recorded. Had no idea that every word was being captured by the device in Zara's necklace. Meanwhile, Joon-Ho was in the basement. While Zara kept Park distracted, Joon-Ho had entered through a service entrance, bypassing security cameras using routes he'd memorized from the intelligence they'd gathered. The basement was where they kept the girls before moving them to the next location in the network. He found 7 of them. 7 young women in a locked room with mattresses on the floor and a single bucket in the corner. They were terrified when they saw him, another man, another threat. He held up his hands, whispered as clearly as he could, I'm here to help. My name is Lee Joon-Ho. I'm going to get you out. One of them, a girl who looked no more than 20 with defiant eyes despite her situation, said in Korean. Why should we trust you? Because 3 months ago, someone trusted me when they had no reason to. And it saved both our lives. I'm passing that forward. He looked at each of them. I can't force you. But if you want out, follow me. Right now. They followed. Getting 7 women out of a trafficking operation while your partner is upstairs keeping the boss distracted is not easy. It requires precise timing, incredible luck, and a willingness to improvise when things inevitably go wrong. Things went wrong when one of Park's security guards decided to do a random basement check. He found Joon-Ho leading the girls toward the exit. Shouted. Reached for his radio. Joon-Ho moved faster. 6 months ago he couldn't have done this. But 6 months of therapy had taught him something important. His body was capable of things his mind had forgotten. He'd been trained once long before the trauma. Those skills were still there, just buried. He disarmed the guard in 4 moves, knocked him unconscious in 2 more. The girls stared at him with a mixture of fear and hope. Run, he whispered. There's a van 2 blocks east. Driver's name is Soo-jin. She's waiting for you. Go. Now. They ran. Upstairs, Zara heard the commotion. Saw Park's expression change from charming businessman to something much darker. He stood up, all pretense dropping. Who are you? He asked in English, his accent perfect. Actually, who are you? Zara dropped her American accent, spoke in her natural Nigerian voice. I'm the woman who just cost you 7 products and about 3 million won. But more importantly, I'm the woman who's been recording this entire conversation. She showed him her necklace. The tiny camera. The live feed that was currently being broadcast to 3 separate servers, including one that belonged to an Interpol contact Joon-Ho had cultivated. Park's face went through several emotions: shock, rage, calculation. He settled on a smile. You're very clever. But you're also very stupid. Do you know who you're dealing with? Do you know what I can do to you? Do you know what I've already survived? Zara countered. She stood up, matched his energy. I watched a man break 15 years of silence to save my life. I fought my way out of an alley against 4 armed men. I helped take down the Jade Serpent Syndicate. Do you really think you scare me? Park pressed a button under his desk. The door locked. 2 guards appeared from a back room. Zara assessed the situation. 2 guards, both armed. Park between her and the exit. No Joon-Ho to help. He was getting the girls to safety. This was on her. She thought about Ruth's training. About what Thandi had taught her. About that alley in Seoul, and the moment she decided to die fighting instead of die begging. She smiled at Park. You're going to regret locking that door. What happened next was brutal, efficient, and not at all cinematic. Real fights aren't choreographed. They're messy and desperate, and whoever's more willing to do damage wins. Zara was very willing to do damage. She used the room's furniture as weapons, threw a glass decanter at the first guard's face, used the moment of his confusion to grab his arm and break it against the table edge. The second guard pulled his gun. She was already moving, using the first guard's body as a shield, forcing the second guard to hesitate about shooting his colleague. That hesitation cost him. She closed the distance, used every technique Ruth had beaten into her over 6 months of brutal training. Disarmed him. Kicked him hard enough to crack ribs. Left both guards groaning on the floor. Park tried to run. She caught him at the door. Slammed him against the wall. Whispered in his ear. Those 7 girls you kept in your basement. They have families. They have names. They're not products. And you're never going to hurt anyone like them again. The police arrived 8 minutes later. Not Park's police, Interpol, working with the Korean National Police's anti-trafficking unit, coordinated by the evidence Zara and Joon-Ho had been feeding them for 2 weeks. They arrested Park Dong-min on charges of human trafficking, kidnapping, and assault. They shut down his karaoke bar. They began dismantling the Red Phoenix Society's operations across 3 countries. And most importantly, they found Lin Wen's daughter. She was in a holding house in Busan, scheduled to be moved to Japan the following week. She was traumatized, malnourished, but alive. Zara and Joon-Ho stood outside the hospital where the rescued girls were being treated and debriefed. Joon-Ho had a split lip from a guard who'd gotten in one good punch before going down. Zara's knuckles were bruised and bloody. "We're terrible at staying safe," Zara observed. "We're excellent at getting results," Joon-Ho countered. "Is this what our life is going to be like? Walking into danger, barely surviving, then doing it again?" Joon-Ho thought about it. About the choice they were making. About the fact that they could both walk away right now, take their money, disappear into normal lives. "Probably," he said honestly. "Does that change anything?" Zara looked at the hospital, thought about the 7 women who were no longer prisoners, about Lin Nguyen who would see her daughter again, about the dozens of other potential victims who'd been saved because this operation had been shut down. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything." They took their first real case 3 days later. Then another. Then another. Word spread in a certain underground network: if you've been victimized by organized crime, if the police wouldn't help, if you had nowhere else to turn, there were 2 people in Seoul who might. A Nigerian woman and a Korean man. The silent contract consulting. They were expensive. They were dangerous. They were effective. And they didn't stop. Over the next year they took on 17 cases. Some were trafficking operations like the Red Phoenix Society. Others were corporate fraud schemes that had ruined families. Money laundering operations. Corrupt officials. Criminal enterprises that preyed on the vulnerable. They won most of the cases. Lost a few. Got injured more times than they could count. Made enemies across 3 continents. And somewhere in the midst of all that violence and danger and endless work, they fell in love. It wasn't dramatic. No grand confessions. No movie moments. Just a gradual realization that the person across the desk was the person they wanted to see every morning. That their voice was the last thing they wanted to hear at night. That fighting side by side had become the most natural thing in the world. The first kiss happened after a particularly brutal case in Manila. They'd been chasing a cybercrime syndicate for 3 weeks, survived an ambush, rescued a 16-year-old girl who'd been trafficked from a provincial town. They were exhausted, hurt, running on adrenaline and spite. They'd collapsed in their hotel room, too tired to even change out of their bloody clothes. Zara was cleaning a gash on Joon-Ho's arm. He was watching her face with that intense focus he had, the one that made her feel seen in a way no one else had ever managed. "What?" she asked. "I love you," he said. Simple. Direct. In Korean first, then repeating it in English, making sure she understood. Zara's hand stilled. She'd known, of course. Had known for months. But hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. "That's dangerous," she said. "Everything about us is dangerous. Love makes you vulnerable. Makes you weak. Love makes you strong enough to keep fighting when logic says you should quit." He caught her hand. "I watched you walk into a Mafia boss's office knowing you might die. I watched you fight 4 men in an alley with broken ribs. I watched you take down a trafficking operation with nothing but intelligence and rage. If that's what weakness looks like, I want to be weak with you." Zara kissed him. It was awkward at first. Both of them too tired, too hurt, too broken to make it graceful. But it was real. It was theirs. When they broke apart, she whispered, "I love you too." In Igbo, in English, in Korean. In every language we speak. "That's at least 3 declarations," Joon-Ho said, almost smiling. "Seems excessive. You were silent for 15 years. I'm making up for lost time." Their relationship evolved slowly from there. They learned each other's rhythms, Zara's morning training sessions and Joon-Ho's evening meditation. Her preference for blunt honesty and his tendency toward careful precision. Her laugh that could fill a room and his smile that he still had to consciously remember to make. They learned to fight together, not just against external enemies, but with each other when they disagreed about cases or risks or tactics. They learned to apologize, to compromise, to recognize when they were projecting trauma onto present situations. It wasn't perfect. They both had nightmares. They both had days where their trauma responses made them push the other away. Joon-Ho still had periods where his voice disappeared completely. Zara still had moments where she'd panic at unexpected sounds. But they'd promised to face their demons side by side. And that's what they did. They also made time for joy. Seoul nights at street food stands, speaking in their mixture of Korean, English and Igbo. Trips to Lagos where Joon-Ho charmed Zara's mother, and learned to eat jollof rice without coughing from the pepper. morning coffee in their office while reviewing cases, stolen moments between danger where they remembered they were more than warriors. They were humans learning to be happy. But throughout all of this, the cases, the love, the building of a life, one shadow never left them. One name that haunted every victory and poisoned every peaceful moment. Madame Chun. She was still out there. Still dangerous. And according to Joon-Ho's contacts who kept careful watch on the underworld's whispers, she was rebuilding. The Jade Serpent might have fallen, but she was rising from its ashes like the creature she'd named her operation after. She disappeared to Taiwan initially, then Shanghai, then scattered herself across a network so complex it took Zara 3 months just to begin mapping it. Madame Chun had spent decades building relationships, placing people in positions of power, creating redundancies and fail-safes. The Jade Serpent had been one branch of her empire. She had others, and she was coming for them. Slowly, patiently, the way apex predators hunt. The first warning came as a message delivered to their office by a child who'd been paid $20 to hand it over. Inside the envelope, a photograph of Zara's mother standing outside her shop in Lagos, unaware she was being watched. No words, just the photo. The message was clear. I can reach anyone you love. Zara stared at that photo for 10 minutes without speaking. Then she picked up her phone and made 3 calls. One to her mother telling her to close the shop immediately and go stay with her cousin in Ibadan. One to the security team she'd hired, tripling their pay and their vigilance. One to her contact in Nigerian intelligence, cashing in a favor to have eyes on her mother 24/7. When she hung up, Joon-Ho was watching her with an expression that mixed rage and guilt. Don't, Zara said before he could speak. Don't you dare say this is your fault. We made this choice together. We knew the risks. She's using the people we love as leverage. Just like they did to me. Just like his voice broke. Even after a year of therapy, a year of progress, this still happened when emotion overwhelmed him. Zara crossed to him, took his face in her hands. Listen to me. You are not that trapped boy anymore. I am not some helpless victim. We are not alone. And Madame Chun? She just made a mistake. What mistake? She reminded us that we have something worth protecting. That means we have something worth fighting for. Zara's eyes were hard as diamonds. She wants to play the fear game? Let's show her what we learned in that alley. Let's show her what happens when prey becomes predator. They spent the next 2 months preparing. Not just reacting to threats but actively hunting. Zara used her network across Africa to trace Madame Chun's financial movements. Joon-Ho reached out to every contact he had. Former Jade Serpent members who defected, intelligence officers, journalists investigating organized crime. They learned that Madame Chun was building something called the Phoenix Network, a multinational criminal enterprise that made the Jade Serpent look small. She had operations in 12 countries now. Money laundering through Macau casinos. Human trafficking routes from Southeast Asia to Europe. Arms dealing between African warlords and Asian manufacturers. Drug smuggling. Political corruption. Everything. She'd taken the lesson of the Jade Serpent's fall and evolved. Instead of one centralized organization, the Phoenix Network was decentralized, semi-autonomous cells that could function independently. If one fell, the others survived. If one leader was arrested, 3 more could step up. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And taking it down would require more than 2 people, no matter how skilled. That's when Zara suggested something radical. We need a team. Joon-Ho looked at her skeptically. We don't work well with others. We don't work well with most people. But there are others like us out there. People who've been victimized by these systems. People with skills and rage and nowhere to direct it. What if we found them? It took 6 weeks, but they assembled what they started calling the Silent Circle. 5 people, each with their own skills, their own trauma, their own reasons for hunting monsters. There was Thandi, the South African security expert who trained Zara in Lagos. She'd lost her sister to a trafficking ring 5 years ago, and had been hunting the people responsible ever since. There was Kenji, a Japanese-American hacker who'd been framed by a cybercrime syndicate and spent 2 years in prison before proving his innocence. He wanted revenge, but more than that, he wanted to make sure no one else went through what he had. There was Amara, a Brazilian investigative journalist who'd been investigating the Phoenix Network independently. She'd been threatened, attacked, nearly killed. She kept investigating. There was David, a former Interpol agent from London who'd been forced to retire after he tried to expose corruption within the organization. He still had contacts. He still had skills. He just needed a team that wouldn't betray him. And finally there was Lin Nguyen. Yes, the same Lin whose daughter they'd rescued from the Red Phoenix Society. She'd refused to go back to Vietnam after her daughter was found. Instead, she'd stayed in Seoul, learned Korean, and started working with anti-trafficking organizations. She knew the networks, knew the patterns, and knew how to spot operations before they fully formed. 8 people sitting around a table in their Itaewon office. 8 people who'd been broken by systems that protected predators. 8 people who decided to break back. This is insane, David said after Zara and Joon-Ho laid out their plan to take down the Phoenix network. You're talking about going after an organization that spans 12 countries, has ties to governments and police forces, and is run by a woman who's survived in this business for 30 years. That's suicide. Probably, Joon-Ho agreed. His voice was stronger now, more consistent. But we're all here because the alternative, doing nothing, living safe, pretending justice doesn't matter, feels worse than death. I'm in, Thandi said immediately. My sister deserves justice. All their victims deserve justice. One by one they all agreed. Not because it was smart. Not because they thought they'd survive. But because some fights are worth having even if you lose. The war against the Phoenix network took 18 months. 18 months of coordinated strikes across multiple countries. While Zara and Joon-Ho dismantled operations in Seoul and Tokyo, Thandi hit trafficking routes in Johannesburg and Cape Town. Kenji exposed financial crimes and digital networks across Southeast Asia. Amara published carefully timed exposés that created public pressure. David used his Interpol contacts to coordinate law enforcement action. Lin worked with victims' families to build legal cases. They weren't always successful. They lost battles, got injured, almost got killed more times than they could count. David was hospitalized in London after an ambush. Amara's apartment in Sao Paulo was firebombed. Kenji was nearly arrested in Bangkok on fabricated charges. Thandi took a bullet in Cape Town and spent 3 weeks in ICU. But they kept fighting. And slowly, painfully, the Phoenix network started crumbling. Madam Chun responded the way cornered predators always do, by escalating. She put bounties on their heads, sent assassins, targeted their families, tried to turn them against each other with misinformation. None of it worked. The final confrontation came in Macau. Zara and Joon-Ho had tracked Madam Chun to a casino that served as one of her money laundering hubs. She'd been moving between locations constantly, but their intelligence suggested she'd be there for a meeting with her remaining cell leaders. It was a trap, obviously. Madam Chun knew they were coming. She'd made sure they knew where to find her. This was her power play. Eliminate the people who'd become her greatest threat, restore fear in her organization, prove she was still untouchable. Zara and Joon-Ho walked into that casino anyway. This is stupid, Zara said as they crossed the gaming floor. Agreed, Joon-Ho replied. We might die. Very possible. Why are we doing this? Joon-Ho stopped, looked at her with those eyes that had been dead when they met and were now very much alive. Because 15 years ago, I lost my voice trying to do the right thing. I got it back fighting alongside you. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the monster to come back. Madam Chun was waiting in a private room on the top floor. No guards, she was too smart for that. Guards could be turned, could be witnesses. This would be just the 3 of them. She looked older than Joon-Ho remembered. Or maybe he'd just been too traumatized to see her clearly before. She was elegant even now, wearing a traditional qipao in blood red. Drinking tea like this was a social call. Nephew, she said in Korean when they entered. You've become quite the nuisance. I'm not your nephew, Joon-Ho said, his voice steady and clear. You lost that right when you locked me in that room. I made you strong. That room taught you to survive. That room taught me that family can be the cruelest monsters. But it also taught me that I'm stronger than my trauma. And I have you to thank for that lesson. Madam Chun's smile tightened. She turned to Zara. And you, the African girl who thinks she can fight above her weight class. Do you know how easy it would be for me to have your mother killed? Your friends? Everyone you've ever loved. Zara sat down uninvited, poured herself tea from Madame Chun's pot. Do you know how many times I've heard that threat? From people more terrifying than you? From people who actually tried to follow through. She took a sip. I'm still here. They're not. You're here because I've allowed you to be here. No. Joon-Ho sat next to Zara. We're here because we're better at this than you are. Smarter. Faster. More adaptable. You built an empire on fear and control. We built a network on trust and shared purpose. And that's why you're losing. For the first time, something flickered in Madame Chun's expression. Not fear, she was too hardened for that. But recognition. Understanding that the power dynamic had shifted. So what now? She asked. You came here to kill me? To arrest me? To what? Talk me into surrendering. None of those things. Zara pulled out her phone, showed Madame Chun the screen. It displayed a live feed from multiple locations. Police raids happening simultaneously across 12 countries. Phoenix network operations being shut down. Leaders being arrested. Evidence being seized. While you've been hunting us, we've been hunting your entire organization. Every cell. Every operation. Every corrupt official on your payroll. And in about. Zara checked her watch. 3 minutes, Macau police are going to walk through that door with arrest warrants for 63 charges including human trafficking, money laundering, murder and conspiracy. Madame Chun's mask finally cracked. You think prison will hold me? You think I don't have contingencies? I think you're 63 years old and facing life in prison. I think your empire is crumbling and your allies are abandoning ship. I think you're alone in a way you've never been before. Joon-Ho leaned forward. And I think the last thing you'll hear before those doors open is my voice. The voice you tried to steal. The voice that's going to testify against you in every trial. In every country for every crime. Right on schedule, the door burst open. Not just Macau police, Interpol, Korean National Police, FBI agents who'd been investigating the Phoenix Network's American operations. They took Madame Chun away in handcuffs. She didn't scream or struggle. Just looked at Joon-Ho one last time and said, You think you've won. But you're just like me now. A monster hunting monsters. No, Joon-Ho said quietly. I'm a survivor who learned to fight back. There's a difference. And then she was gone. The aftermath took months. Trials in multiple countries. Testimony from hundreds of victims. Media circuses and legal battles and political fallout. The silent circle disbanded after that. Not because they'd failed, but because they'd succeeded. Some of them went back to their lives. David returned to legitimate law enforcement. Lynn went back to Vietnam with her daughter. Amara won a Pulitzer for her exposés. Others kept fighting. Thandi started an organization helping trafficking survivors. Kinji built digital security systems for vulnerable communities. Zara and Joon-Ho kept their office in Itaewon. Kept taking cases. But they were more selective now, more strategic. They'd learned something important. You can't save everyone. But you can save some people. And some people is better than none. 3 years after that scream in a Seoul alley, Zara and Joon-Ho stood in their office reviewing a new case. A tech company in Singapore was using AI to target vulnerable populations for predatory lending. It was complex. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of case they'd started this firm to handle. Think we can crack it? Zara asked. Joon-Ho smiled, easy now, natural, no longer something he had to consciously remember to do. With you? Always. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with, and the fight continues. Because that's more honest. More real. Zara and Joon-Ho didn't fix everything. They didn't eliminate organized crime or end corruption or save every victim. Their trauma didn't magically disappear. Joon-Ho still had bad days where his voice retreated. Zara still had nights where she woke up swinging at shadows. But they built a life anyway. A good life. A meaningful life. They got married on a beach in Lagos. Zara's mother crying through the whole ceremony while Joon-Ho's therapist Dr. Park sat in the front row beaming with pride. They mixed Nigerian and Korean traditions in ways that made no traditional sense but felt perfect to them. They bought an apartment in Seoul with space for an actual home office instead of working where they slept. They adopted a dog. A rescue who'd been abused and was learning to trust again. Just like them. They took vacations. Learned to cook each other's traditional foods with varying success. argued about where to spend holidays, built inside jokes and shared memories that had nothing to do with violence or trauma. They learned to be more than their worst moments, more than their scars. And when new cases came, and they always did, they faced them together. Partners in crime fighting, partners in love, partners in the endless, exhausting, necessary work of making the world slightly less dark. Zara looked up from a file and asked, "This one in Singapore? Think we can handle it?" Joon-Ho smiled, full smile now, something he'd had to relearn how to do. "With you," he said, voice stronger than it had been. "Always." Because the man who couldn't speak learned to scream, and the woman who was meant to be prey became a hunter. And together, they became something the underworld learned to fear. The silent contract. A partnership forged in blood, sustained by respect, and powered by the simple truth that sometimes the people who save you are the ones you were supposed to destroy. Zara and Joon-Ho's story doesn't end here. It continues in the shadows of 12 cities, in the ledgers of corrupt corporations, in the whispered fears of men who thought they were untouchable. Because Madam Chun is still out there, building her empire in the dark. And they're coming for her. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with something more dangerous: patience, strategy, and the kind of love that's been tested by fire and came out as steel. Some curses are broken with magic, some with therapy, and some are broken by finding one person who looks at your worst self and says, "I see you. And I'm staying anyway." Joon-Ho's curse wasn't mystical. It was trauma. And it wasn't broken by love alone, it was broken by choice, by work, by therapy, by Zara's refusal to let him hide, and by his own decision to fight for his voice even when every cell in his body screamed to stay silent. Zara's curse wasn't supernatural either. It was poverty, debt, the inheritance of her father's shame. And she broke it not by running away, not by taking the easy money, but by standing in that alley with a metal pipe and deciding that she'd rather die fighting than live afraid. That's the real magic. Not spells or shamans or ancient rituals. Just two people who looked at their trauma and said, "You don't own me anymore." And if you're watching this from wherever you are, Lagos, Seoul, London, Manila, Accra, New York, Toronto, Mumbai, Johannesburg, and you're carrying your own curse, your own trauma, your own impossible situation, I want you to know something. You can break it too. Not overnight. Not with one dramatic moment. But with small choices. With finding your people. With refusing to stay silent when silence is killing you. With standing up even when your hands are shaking. Zara didn't save Joon-Ho. Joon-Ho didn't save Zara. They saved themselves. They just did it side by side. And that's the story I wanted to tell you. Not about a magical African woman healing a broken Korean man. Not about a captor and captive falling in love. But about two equals, two survivors, two people who met at rock bottom and decided to climb out together. The silent contract isn't a romance. It's not a thriller. It's not a cultural fusion experiment. It's a promise. The promise that you don't have to face your demons alone. That partnership is more powerful than domination. That healing is possible even when the wounds run 15 years deep. That your past doesn't define your future unless you let it. And yeah, it's also about a Nigerian forensic accountant and a traumatized Korean mafia strategist taking down criminal empires while slowly falling in love. Because why not? We can have deep themes and entertaining plots. We can address trauma and have badass fight scenes. We can respect cultures and tell universal stories. That's what this channel is about. Stories that don't choose between depth and entertainment. Stories that blend cultures without stereotyping them. Stories about people who look like you, sound like you, struggle like you, but refuse to stay down. If that's what you want more of, then subscribe. Not for me. For yourself. Because you deserve stories that see you. That challenge you. That make you think, maybe I can survive this too. One more time, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Tell me what you thought. Tell me if this story changed something in you, even just a little bit. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about breaking curses and refusing to be prey, share this with them. Because stories like this, they're meant to be shared. They're meant to remind us that we're not alone in our fights. The Silent Contract. Zara Osei and Lee Joon-Ho. A debt collector and a ghost. A partnership that became a love story. A love story that became a war. A war that became a new beginning. Thank you for riding with me for this whole hour. Thank you for investing your time in characters who are messy and traumatized and beautifully, imperfectly human. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, your silence doesn't protect you. Your voice does. Even if it comes out as a scream. This is the silent contract. This is your storyteller. And this is just the beginning. Subscribe, comment, share, and break your own curses one day at a time. Peace.